The agenda this week examined the cost of the province's record-spending budget and got David Frum's take on the U.S. presidential election. The agenda's Week in Review begins with a report card for Ontario's K-12 virtual schools.
We are just finished the first quadmester, which is a new word to me. I've heard of semesters, but now we have quadmesters, and that means it's time for an online report card. So let's go around the horn here, our virtual horn, and talk about how you would grade the program so far. Annie, in your view, how's it going?
Well, I'm not in a school, so I'm not sure I'm the best person to ask. I think that some of it appears to be going okay. A report came out from Ottawa yesterday that raised a lot of concerns about kids' well-being and mental health. And I think maybe the biggest concern is about equity. For kids who are already struggling, families that were dealing with a lot of challenges, it seems to be that that it is more challenging to support learning online, and we have to be thinking about that. Relying on families forever and ever is not really sustainable and definitely not equitable.
Emily, what are you seeing in Sudbury?
I think that overall, I'd give us a passing grade. I think that we've done a good job of meeting these challenges and trying to meet the needs of families who are, as Annie said, coming from a variety of starting points as they begin doing this online learning. So I think I'd give us a passing grade. We've worked really hard in our board to make this as smooth a transition as possible, and it's been a real team effort involving really everyone in the board. So I think we're doing pretty well, all things considered.
Pretty well, passing grade. Okay, good. Tesfai, just before you tell us how you're doing, Success Beyond Limits. Just give us the 20-second speech on what you guys do.
Yeah, so we're an education organization that's based in the northwest part of Toronto, and we provide all sorts of academic and social supports. We're based in the local high school at Westview Centennial, which is where we operate our youth space during the school day, and it's open to students from 8 a.m. to 6 p.m. And then we also have a summer program, which is located at York University, where students get an advanced high school credit before they get to high school. And
how much of what you're doing is in person and how much is virtual?
So we have both. So we do have the in-person portion. We've worked very closely with the administrative team at our local school to ensure that we are aligned with the public health guidelines that are in place, but also the protocols and procedures that they've put in place, and looking at ways that we can continue to support students. But we also know that we can only have a limited amount of students in our space. So we have our virtual youth space that's open for students to access at any point during the school day. So if they're not in the school building, they've opted for virtual learning, they can still get those supports as well.
Okay, and how's the virtual going?
I mean, virtual has been a challenge, I think, for our community and for other communities as well. We know that access to technology has been a barrier for many students, and that's been the case since the lockdown. And that also continues for some students now into the new school year. We know some students have not received pieces of technology till the end of this quad. And we know that that's still an ongoing challenge on top of being able to navigate the online platform. So there are a lot of challenges that young people and families are still facing.
Andrea, how are you managing in Peel with virtual learning?
Well, I've had the privilege of teaching in the online school in Peel, and it's important to note it's in the secondary panel, so I think that's going to be significantly different than my friends in elementary. But I know it was certainly a rocky start in Peel, and I think for many boards, but at the end of the day, I'd probably put us at a B. I think, we've adapted well. Many of the educators have, the students have described that they are certainly learning and enjoying the environment, and I'd rate us a B, a level 3 for sure.
Okay, you said a rocky start. What made it rocky?
Well, I think we had to pivot quickly, and as numbers grew in terms of those that are wanting to learn online, that we had to reimagine the education system, and it's no longer brick and mortar, but they had to in Peel go from many students in the classroom to many students online and starting an entire online school. And so rather than timetabling for 1,200 students, 1,500 students 80, 100 staff, you're in the numbers for the Peel Online School at 13,000, 15,000, initially started at 7,000. So, there is significant change in a short period of time. And, this is new learning for everyone.
Mm-hmm. Ron, how about you? How's it going?
Well, I agree. I think we've 3 months ago, nobody would have thought that we would have a virtual school in the secondary panel, and now we do. And we set up that virtual school in a really short record time. If we were to build a brand new school, we'd have lots of lead time for that. We'd have months and months of planning and board staff involved. We condensed that whole piece into about 3.5 weeks to get the school up and running. In the Toronto District School Board, we have 18,000 secondary students in our virtual school. And I would say it's more than a passing grade, and it's more than a level 3 grade. I would say we're doing pretty well.
Give us some of the bullet point highlights of what you think a smart Ontario government going forward would do to reignite the economy in the midst of this pandemic.
Yeah, and to think about the future, let's just situate ourselves here. And I think it surprises Ontarians that if we compare the size of our economy to states that we look to, Michigan, New York, Ohio, Pennsylvania, we've been hearing those states over the last week, incessantly. We're a smaller economy. We were the average size of the 7 states surrounding us 30, 40 years ago. We are now the poorest, as average GDP per capita. I'm not saying at the low end, and certainly the extremes of American society may not be something we want to replicate. But and that comes out of weak business investment, weak R&D investment, weak productivity, and those numbers have tracked for quite a while. What do we do to goose growth somewhat back to what we had 20, 25 years ago? Everybody's facing that, but we've been on a slow, steady decline to a greater extent. And we need to think about inclusive growth. And the people at Queen's Park, you asked me about the public servants, they're thinking about this quite a bit. And that was really what they were focusing on with regard to regulations, with regard to increased childcare, with regard to infrastructure investment, we need to emphasize. We talked about broadband investment just a second ago. Huge amounts going into transit, highways to a lesser extent, and other sectors as well. But we have to ask ourselves whether we're making the right investments and doing it effectively. There's one other thing that really surprised me when we were looking at this, and that is about 30 of the 60 states and provinces in the United States and Canada have actually done growth plans, 5-year growth plans. Some of us used to think of those as almost Soviet, but it's remarkable that virtually half the states in the United States, red states as well as blue states, have done growth plans to emphasize the sectors and to focus on the sectors and subsectors that we should be thinking about more. And that might be something, Saskatchewan's done it. We looked at Illinois intensively. That might be something that Ontario wants to look at. Part of the challenge with Ontario is that even as we look out in Toronto and see the cranes and the steady growth and the tech investment and things like that, almost all the job growth over the last decade in Ontario has been in Toronto and Ottawa. Outside those two centers, there's been almost no job growth. We really need to think about inclusive growth going forward. And that's really, thank you, that paper was all about.
Inclusive growth. Okay, Sheila, based on what you're looking at, do you see policies being put in place that will bring us inclusive growth going forward?
Unfortunately, I don't see it. And I think when we look at, again, the big picture from this pandemic, it's racial inequality, it's income inequality, and it's really what a frayed public service and public sector we have at the moment. And I think at this point, with infection rates where they're at, that we really need to switch strategy. The government at this point is just hoping to have a private sector-led both recovery and period to get us through the pandemic. We are nowhere close to the end of this pandemic, unfortunately. We need government to lead, and we need government to lead in terms of both economic growth and in terms of addressing these huge inequalities, both in health outcomes and in economic outcomes.
Craig, last minute to you on whether or not we're getting the policies we need for inclusive growth.
We're moving in the right direction. I mean, when we look at where the job losses have been, it's been disproportionately low-paid workers. And when we look at who, what comprises the population that works within low-paid jobs, what you can see is, there's more women, there's more youths, there's more visible minorities, there's more newcomers that are in those jobs. And so there's no question that this recession has had a very strong inequality dimension to it. I think part of the government response in terms of the Canadian the Canadian emergency income benefits, where you're getting $500 a week. Basically what you're doing is you're maintaining the income that you're replacing the income that those low income workers were making. And so I think we are seeing programs and policies that are designed to address some of that inequality.
I wonder how much internecine warfare you see coming between the Biden wing of the party, which of course is victorious and moderate, and the so-called Bernie Sanders AOC wing of the party, which one suspects will get a little chippier in its demands over the ensuing months. What do you see?
Well, what I see, the greatest resource that progressive wing has is the need of cable television for conflict. It's the main story of the Biden administration is going to be pretty responsible people going to work every day, dealing with very, very difficult problems and succeeding some of the time and failing other times. And that's just not a made for CNN story. CNN doesn't want to hear, we're struggling to put together a climate change agreement without a congressional majority. It's hard, difficult work, and we've made some incremental progress. They want fighting. And the model is ESPN. So the incentive of every cable booker is to bring on, to make AOC a media star and to create a fight between AOC and Biden that, as we saw in the Democratic primaries, didn't actually correspond to where Democratic voters are, and also misunderstands what it means to be on the left wing of the Democratic Party. That people who live in New York, people who book TV, want the left wing to look like the left wing they know, sophisticated, urban, highly urban, progressive, younger, and not understanding that the thing driving the Democratic Party, for example, toward a bigger definition of healthcare is the people who elected Biden, which is more rural, blacker, less well-educated, and not as culturally modern, not as culturally progressive, but very concerned with basics like college education and healthcare. But those tensions will be there. In a way, the election result does Biden one favor, which is by preserving power in the hands of Mitch McConnell and the Senate Republicans, it gives Biden an intelligible explanation to the progressive wing why he can't do what they want. So they would say things like, we want you to abolish police forces. So Biden's own answer is, well, I think that's A, stupid, and B, obnoxious, and C, likely to lose me the election, and D, nobody wants it. But and all of those things are true, but it's easier to say, hey, you make some points here, but McConnell, I have McConnell. I'm as heartbroken as you, McConnell. So McConnell can be for Biden a tool of party discipline. But I think when you think of if you identify the Democratic left with Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez and urban progressives rather than James Clyburn and black representatives in the southern states, you're doing it wrong.
Well, I have had some pretty good debates over the last week with some people who believe that Bernie Sanders would have done better running an unabashedly socialist campaign against Donald Trump than Joe Biden did. What do you think of those prognostications?
Well, people who those hypothetical matchups are, in the end, they're unanswerable. But I would just say the question is, here's what Joe Biden did to win the presidency in the way he did. He simultaneously produced a mobilization in Black America as big as that produced by Barack Obama, and at the same time, won conservative-leaning, educated suburban voters in places like the suburbs of Phoenix and the suburbs of Houston and Dallas, and most importantly, the suburbs of Philadelphia. So And those are the two groups that didn't like Bernie Sanders. So that you say, well, Bernie Sanders would have had to find some other, because he did not strongly appeal to black voters, and because he did not strongly appeal to more affluent, more conservative-leaning suburbanites, he would have had to find some other magic pool of voters. And basically, I would say this: any plan, when someone says, "I have a plan to win power by producing world record turnout among groups of people who vote very lightly," I think the better plan is to produce slight improvements in turnout from people who do vote regularly.
As soon as it turned out that people could use AI to generate fake media, the first use case was in non-consensual pornography. And that's actually where the name deepfake comes from, because the first kind of deepfakes that really hit the public imagination 3.5 years ago were in the form of non-consensual porn on Reddit, and the guy who posted them was somebody called Deepfakes. And he made these fake porn films of celebrities, but it's now become a problem where it's got its own internet ecosystem, and it's not only female celebrities who are targeted. Normal women are targeted too, because the AI can be trained to generate fake pornography of you based on just a few digital images that can be taken from your social media, for example. And now we're also starting to see very disturbing deepfake porn of minors. But I don't see these two things as mutually exclusive. Although pornography leads the way, it is inevitable that deepfakes will also be used in politics and in fraud and all kinds of other avenues where they can be used as disinformation against individuals in a way that hasn't been possible before.
And we seem to be, as a species, hardwired to believe what we see on a video. And therefore, talk to us about the implications of believing what we see when what we see is phony.
Well, it's something that psychologists call processing fluency. So when we see visual information that looks right, that looks real, we're hardwired to want to believe it. And this is happening at a time when video is in fact becoming the most important medium of communication. I think 82% of internet traffic next year is going to be driven by the upload and download of videos. So the fact that video as a medium of communication, a medium which we place so much rigor onto, which we assume to be an extension of our own perception, can be undermined at a time when it's becoming the most important medium of communication is really alarming. But there's a counter effect to this too. And this is that as knowledge of deepfakes start to grow, something called the liar's dividend starts to enhance. So as people become aware that we're entering an epoch where seeing is no longer believing, you can see something with your eyes that looks genuine and authentic, and it could be fake, then you start to deny the veracity of all authentic media as well. And that is, of course, something that's great for bad actors. In a world where anything can be faked, including something that until now we assume is evidence, everything can also be denied.
That's just some of what we covered this week on The Agenda. For more, including the full conversations, you can visit our website, tvo.org, our YouTube channel at youtube.com/theagenda, or our Twitter feed, twitter.com/theagenda.
The Agenda with Steve Paikin is brought to you by the Chartered Professional Accountants of Ontario. CPA Ontario is a regulator, an educator, a thought leader, and an advocate. We protect the public. We advance our profession. We guide our CPAs. We are CPA Ontario. And by viewers like you. Thank you.